Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. Today we're taking a plunge into the totally fascinating, beautifully delicate, and let's be real, sometimes deadly world of aquatic ecosystems. We're going to explore what makes these underwater environments actually tick, how they sustain so much life, and terrifyingly, just how easily that life can be snuffed out. So if you've ever stared out over a quiet lake or the vast ocean and wondered about the invisible mechanics happening right beneath the surface, well, you're absolutely in the right place. Let's get right into it. Okay, so here is the roadmap for our journey today. First up, the aquatic world. Then we'll look at the delicate balance. After that, we've got the death of a lake, followed by the wonder of wetlands. And we'll wrap things up with estuaries and mangroves. All right, section 1, the aquatic world. You know, while land ecosystems are usually defined by things like moisture and temperature, the aquatic world relies on a totally different metric, salt. We literally categorize these environments based on their salt content, measured in parts per thousand, or PPT. So freshwater ecosystems, like your local ponds and rivers, have very low salt, always less than 5 PPT. On the total opposite end, we have marine ecosystems, like our shallow seas and oceans, sitting at 35 PPT or higher. But right in the middle, that's where we find brackish waters. Ranging from 5 to 35 PPT, these are your estuaries and mangrove swamps, basically acting as a biological bridge between the river and the sea. So, who actually lives in all this water? Well, we group aquatic organisms based on where they hang out and how they move. Right at the top, floating at the surface, we have the neustin. Just below them, clinging to plant stems, are the periphyton. Then you've got the famous plankton, those tiny plants and animals that basically just drift around totally at the mercy of the currents. Contrast them with the nekton. These are the powerful swimmers, like fish, that actually fight and conquer those currents. And finally, way down in the mud, we have the benthos, our bottom dwellers. Moving on to section 2, the delicate balance. No matter which of those 5 groups an organism belongs to, its survival ultimately comes down to a very delicate balance of 2 absolute currencies, sunlight and dissolved oxygen. These 2 things literally divide a body of water right in half. Up top, in the photic zones, sunlight shines through. And because there's light, plants can perform photosynthesis, actively pumping out oxygen, while all the organisms are respiring or breathing. But drop below that and we plunge into the aphotic zone. It's pitch black. Photosynthesis stops completely, so no new oxygen is being made, but everything down there is still breathing. Oxygen is only being consumed, which makes it a much, much harsher environment. And that brings us to a really hidden tragedy known as winter kill. Just imagine a shallow lake freezing over in the dead of winter. Snow piles up on the ice, basically acting like a giant blackout curtain. Suddenly, that entire lake turns into an apophytic zone. Photosynthesis completely shuts down. But here's the thing. All the fish and microbes, they're still down there breathing. They slowly use up all the dissolved oxygen in the dark until they literally suffocate. The fish die, but those of us standing on the surface have absolutely no idea until the ice melts in the spring and reveals the devastation. It's pretty bleak. So what's the critical threshold here? 3 to 5 parts per million. That is the ultimate danger zone. You see, oxygen is already less soluble in warm water, but whether it's from a temperature spike or a winter kill event, the moment dissolved oxygen drops below that 3 to 5 parts per million mark, aquatic life crosses its narrow tolerance limits and mass die-offs begin. Which leads us directly into section 3, death of a lake. We usually think of lakes as these permanent fixtures on the map, right? But they're really not. Kind of like living things, lakes are born, they age, and eventually they die. Just look at Lake Sudarshan in Gujarat, which dates all the way back to 300 BC. It's ancient, and it shows us that over massive stretches of time, we're talking millennia, lakes slowly accumulate mineral and organic matter from surface runoff. They gradually fill up with sediment. It's just a natural aging process. Now, that slow buildup of nutrients is called natural eutrophication. Over thousands of years, a lake gathers nutrients, eventually fills in, turns into a marsh, and finally becomes dry land. Totally normal. But the real issue occurs when we introduce cultural eutrophication. This happens when human activities, like dumping wastewater or runoff from agricultural fertilizers, pump massive amounts of nutrients into the water. It essentially hits fast forward, compressing thousands of years of natural aging into just a few short decades. Now, you might be thinking, wait a second, if eutrophia literally means adequate and healthy nutrition, how on earth does a lake suffocate from getting too many nutrients? It's a great question, and it's basically a tragic biological domino effect. Here is the play-by-play of how a lake dies. Step 1, agricultural phosphates and nitrates wash into the water. Step 2, green algae go absolutely crazy on this all-you-can-eat buffet, multiplying into a massive algal bloom that covers the surface and completely blocks out the sun. Without sunlight, underwater plants start dying off. Step 3, those algae actually have a really short lifespan, so when they die, microbes swoop in to decompose them. But, and here is the absolute kicker, decomposition requires massive amounts of oxygen. So, step 4, oxygen levels totally plummet as the microbes breathe it all in. And finally, step 5, the fish suffocate. And sometimes it gets even worse. Toss in unusually warm waters with all those excess nutrients, and you can trigger harmful algal blooms, or HABs. These don't just suck up oxygen, they turn the water this nasty red or brown color and actually produce real toxins. So they aren't just suffocating the fish, they're actively poisoning birds, marine mammals, and even humans, making the air around the lake dangerous to breathe. All right, let's switch gears a bit. Section 4, the wonder of wetlands. So what exactly makes a wetland different from a lake? Well, it mostly comes down to depth and life. Lakes are generally standing bodies of water deeper than 3 meters with very little vegetation in them. Wetlands, on the flip side, are shallow, usually less than 3 meters deep. And because they're shallow, sunlight reaches all the way to the bottom. This makes them incredibly rich in nutrients and absolutely jam-packed with aquatic plant growth, or macrophytes. Just to give you an idea of the sheer scale we're talking about, let's look at India. India is home to a staggering 27,403 wetlands. And these aren't just empty swamps, they are intensely productive zones. In fact, 70% of the wetland area in India is used for paddy cultivation. So they're directly feeding millions of people, while simultaneously filtering out sediment, recycling nutrients, and keeping floods in check. They are literally the planet's kidneys. Because they do so much heavy lifting, organized conservation is crucial. Take Aminpur Lake in Telangana, which is rigorously protected as India's very first biodiversity heritage site. Then you've got places like Loktak Lake and Kealdeo National Park. These two actually sit on the Montreux Record, which is an international list highlighting wetlands that urgently need priority conservation attention because human interference is severely degrading them. We really have to protect these shallow, rich habitats. And that brings us to our final stop, Section 5, estuaries and mangroves. Now we are leaving the freshwater behind entirely. Estuaries are just incredible. They are officially the single most productive water bodies in the entire world. This is where freshwater rivers crash into the ocean tide, creating this awesome salinity gradient that goes from 0 all the way to 35 ppt. The tide washes in twice a day, bringing an endless supply of nutrients. But because estuaries also happen to be prime locations for major seaports, they are constantly under massive threat from civic and industrial waste dumping. And thriving right there in that harsh, salty mix are the mangroves. The biological genius of these trees is just off the charts. Mangroves live in waterlogged mud that is completely anaerobic, meaning there's literally 0 oxygen in the soil. So how do they survive? Species like Avicennia grow what are called pneumatophores. These are specialized blind roots that actually grow upwards, poking right out of the mud so they can breathe the air. They're essentially built-in snorkels. Oh, and their survival tricks don't stop there. Because the saltwater below them is super toxic to a sprouting seed, they use a process called viviparity. Instead of just dropping a seed into that hostile salty water and hoping for the best, the parent mangrove tree actually germinates the seed while it's still attached to the branch. It gives its offspring a massive biological head start so it can actually survive once it drops into the mud. It's a stunning evolutionary workaround. So, why does all of this matter to us? Well, because these incredibly resilient mangroves are our ultimate natural shields. Their tangled prop roots physically slow down rushing water, stabilizing the shores and preventing soil erosion. When monsoons, hurricanes, or even tsunamis roll in, mangroves act as a massive physical buffer, drastically reducing how much water floods into coastal lowlands. They're protecting us, all while giving countless fish species a safe place to breed. Which brings us to our final thought for this explainer. From the microscopic plankton driving the delicate oxygen balance in our lakes to the mighty mangroves physically shielding our coastlines from tsunamis, these aquatic ecosystems do all the silent, heavy lifting required to keep our planet habitable. Yet between agricultural runoff and endless coastal development, we are pushing them right to the brink. So the big question we have to ask ourselves is, how can we balance our rapidly expanding human settlements with the survival of the very fragile ecosystems that ultimately protect us? It's a question we really can't afford to ignore anymore. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive, and keep seeking to understand the incredible mechanics of our natural world.